welcome to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, Integrity Deficit Disorder. We have a variety of news articles today. Actually, we have 7 short articles that I think that my audience will be listed to listen to them. They are in terms of about U.S. pending sales slip again, Mar-a-Lago prosecutor by leaks, with IRS funding, Democrats plan to audit the middle class, the Biden fails the monthly pox test, who wants to host a Biden speech. Joe Biden is still dragging his party down. And the last one, which we may not get to, is improved memory by zapping your brain. I was hoping we could get that one. Yeah. So I'm going to begin. And I'm going to begin with U.S. pending home sales slip again in July as market cools, but the mortgage rates show signs of stabilizing. What we've seen here in terms of more of the economy having strife, the numbers U.S. pending home sales fell July by 1% according to the monthly index. Analysts by Wall Street Journal had forecast the pending home sales dropped by 3%. In June, pending home sales fell by 8.6%. This is also the 8th time pending home sales have fallen in the last 9 months. The index reflects transactions where the contract has been signed for an existing home sale, but the sale has not yet closed. Economists view it as an indicator for the direction of exiting home sales in subsequent months. The drop in pending home sales follows weaker data on the new home and exiting homes sales fronts, and well as dip in mortgage application activity. Key details: compared with a year earlier, transactions were down 20%. Pending sales fell in 3 of the 4 major regions, but activity increased in the West slightly. Big picture, housing market activity has stalled since the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates. That's a fact, Jack. Sellers are finding it hard to find buyers in many markets as potential home buyers continue to pull back as the economic outlook remains uncertain. And even in the fall, we're looking at scratching our heads whether or not there are going to be enough sales for home builders to continue to do what they've done. And we'll find that out pretty soon. 1 down, 6 to go. Here's one that grabbed my attention. It's Washington's Mar-a-Lago prosecution by leaks, prosecuting Trump by leaks. The Justice Department wants the search affidavit secret while details spill into the press. Merrick Garland opened a press briefing 2 weeks ago with the words, "Since I became Attorney General, I have made clear that the Department of Justice will speak through its court filings and its work." Then how does the Right Honorable Attorney General explain the multiple leaks in the press concerning the Department of Justice investigation of Donald Trump's handling of presidential documents? It sure looks like someone is prosecuting the case through the media. The latest example arrived Monday in a dispatch on the New York Times that Justice has recovered more than 300 documents with classified markings from Mr. Trump since he left office. Which documents? Question mark. The report doesn't say, but rest assured they included documents from the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI spanning a variety of topics of national security interest. A person briefed on the matter and said, there's our old friend, a person briefed on the matter. Sense to hear from you again, whoever you are. Another leaker, a leak again. This follows the August 11th Washington Post report that the Bureau investigation agents who searched Trump's Mar-a-Lago home were looking for classified documents relating to nuclear weapons, which nuclear secrets the Post didn't have. And the search warrant released later included no mention of documents related to nuclear weapons. Wet my whistle here. As the leakers know, these reports are on attempt to justify to the public the extraordinary search of former president's home. They have the effect of suggesting that Mr. Trump may have committed a crime in mishandling the documents. They also keep the former president at the center of the 2022 midterm election campaign, which is exactly where Democrats in Congress want him. Meanwhile, Mr. Garland's lawyers are telling federal judge Bruce Reinhart that the legal affidavit with more details about the search shouldn't be released to the public, or that if the judge releases it, the affidavit should be so heavily redacted as to tell the public and Mr. Trump's lawyers a very little. In other words, a person briefed on the matter can leak details about the investigation to the press that the public is supposed to credit as true. But the actual court finding and its work, as Mr. Garland's phrase, must remain secret. And these people wonder why tens of millions of dollars of Americans don't trust the Justice Department and the FBI. Is this all that sounds familiar? You may be thinking of the Russia collusion probe. That story was also fed by leaks to the press with episodes that were portrayed as ominous. The walls were closing in, but often turned out to have innocent providence as far as less consequence. We later found out the entire collusion probe was a political concoction promoted by a lawyer for a Hillary Clinton with an assist from Justice and James Comey, FBI. It was an inside job. Meanwhile, a report Tuesday in Just the News say that officials at the White House gave the green light to Justice in the National Archives to pursue the documents case by nixing Mr. Trump's claim of executive privilege. The reporter, John Solomon, is Mr. Trump's representative to the archives, but the documents he cites appear to be genuine. Don't expect this to get page one in most press, but those who want to know more than take Justice dictation, this news isn't reassuring that the probe is apolitical. That means it's not political, is what they're trying to leave. 2 weeks since the Mar-a-Lago legal cage also doesn't look any stronger. Lawyers David Rifkin and Lee Kinsey make a compelling case Tuesday on the pages that Mr. Trump has every right to hold the documents for a time at his home until the 1978 Presidential Records Act. If there is a dispute over them, then it is a matter for negotiation and a most minor sanction. Their argument is stronger than anything we've seen so far, or possible violations by Mr. Trump out of the Espionage Act, or some obstruction of justice charge. Perhaps Mr. Garland's prosecutors are sitting on bombshell info that Mr. Trump did something nefarious with the documents. But then putting that doubt in the public mind is one purpose of the leaks, make it all look bad without having to prove it. All of which goes back to the question of prosecutorial discretion. Mr. Garland may think he is being scrupulous about the law in pursuing Mr. Trump, but he has opened a political trauma room. If he doesn't have a solid case that Mr. Trump committed serious crimes with evidence that a majority of the public will find persuasive, he should settle the whole matter quickly. Prosecution by leaking is hurting justice as much as it is Mr. Trump. Yes, I think they're stepping all over their own teeth, their own toes. Here I am drinking tea, I'm thinking about toes. Next article, with the IRS funding Democrats plan to audit the middle class. It sounded like an ironclad promise when Jared Bernstein of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors told Fox News Neil Cavuto on August 16th the $45.6 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act is to expand Internal Revenue Service compliance efforts will not be spent on increasing audits of anybody making less than $400,000 a year. The IRS enforcement is going to target those well above $400,000, Mr. Bernstein pledged. There's no targeting of the middle class. Mr. Cavuto seemed skeptical, asking the White House advisor if he meant everyone under $400,000 in income will not be scrutinized more by the IRS, their deductions examined more by the IRS. Replied forcefully, Mr. Bernstein said, they will not be scrutinized more. Mr. Bernstein was shading the truth. Other term members, Biden members, got in on his obfuscation. But if you read between the weasel words, you can tell that they know the number of audits on those making less than $400,000 would increase. In an August 10 letter to the IRS, Commissioner Charles Redding, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrote, I direct that any additional resources the IRS receive from the Act shall not be used to increase the share of small business or household below $400,000 threshold that are audited relative to historic levels. The commissioner wrote senators on August the 4th promising the IRS would design the investment of enforcement resources around Ms. Yellen's directive that audit rates will not rise relative to recent years for households making under $400,000. These officials couched it in confusing language, like I'm having difficulty reading here, but it's clear that the administration was saying more households of all incomes will be audited by the IRS with its new compliance funding, with each income group's share of audits remaining roughly what it has been. So what shares of audits have typically been of Americans making under 400,000? Question mark. Well, most of them are made in 2018, the last year for which the IRS has released complete data. There were 367,369 audits of the individual returns. Of these, 3.8% of the total were of returns reporting no positive income. Households reporting between 1 and 25,000 in income receive 52.9%, and those earnings up to 50,000 an additional 19.9%. Those above 50,000 and under 75,000 received 7.3%, and households making 75,000 to 100,000 were hit by 4.2%. Households with 100,000 to 200,000 in income were subject to 7.3 of all the audits. Added up, more than 95% of all audits of individual returns have historically been of households with less than 200,000 in income, and more than 75% of those who less than $75,000 income. Less than 5% have been performed on returns of those with 200,000 or more in income. This pattern has been relatively stable for a long time because of the way the IRS picks returns for audits. Some audits are randomly assigned, others triggered by algorithms that flag discrepancies. Still, others are the result of secretive processes the IRS won't reveal. But it's obvious that the data that the bulk of new audits funded for inflation reduction are going to hit households making less than $200,000 a year. If the IRS honors its promise to hold their shares of audits to historical levels, that'll be 95% of their new audits. How many more audits are coming in total? It's hard to say. The IRS won't predict what taxpayers are in store for. The Congressional Budget Office won't estimate, though it did say that the number of audits will rise for all taxpayers. To level, the IRS had to 2010 when great percentage of returns were audited. Drawing on that year's data, House Ways and Means Committee staff's analysts predicts that this will be an additional $1.2 million a year over the coming decade. Wow. Of which 710,000 each year will hit those making less than 75,000. However, the actual numbers break down. It's clear that most normal Americans will face increased likelihood of it being audited, and based on Mr. and Mrs. Yellen's and Mr. Retwig's comments, the administration knows this, Mr. Bernstein's protestations aside. The IRS annual enforcement budget was $5.4 billion this year, and it's getting $45.6 billion more this decade from the new law. Of course, more people of all income levels will get audited. Congressional Democrats even had an opportunity to protect Americans making less than $400,000 from these audits and chose not to send Mike Crapo, Republican Idaho, proposed an amendment on the Inflation Reduction Act to prohibit the use of any new IRS compliance funds for audits of companies or individuals with incomes below $400,000. All of 50 Democratic senators voted no on August 7th, killing the amendment. This all means that the debate on the IRS between now and November will not be on taxing the rich, but on badgering the middle class. That's an argument Democrats will lose every time. This was from Karl Grove, looking after the taxpayers' best interests. I have another Biden. A bumbling Biden fails the monkeypox test. Would he have handled COVID better than Trump? A different outbreak gives ample reason for doubt. Donald Trump was unlucky that once in a century pandemic struck in his re-election year, and Joe Biden is lucky that the current monkeypox outbreak is relatively mild, but his administration's bumbling response belies Mr. Biden's 2020 argument that he would have handled COVID better. Monkeypox, first identified in lab animals in 1958, in a close relative smallpox, though it is less lethal and contagious. Periodic outbreaks have occurred in Central and West Africa, where the virus is endemic and spreads among wild animals. Humans can catch it through direct contact with the skin lesions of an infected animal or person. A small U.S. outbreak in 2003 was linked to rodents imported from Ghana by an exotic pet dealer. The virus infected 71 Americans, but was quickly contained with the help of the smallpox vaccine. No one died. The outbreak, coupled with growing concerns about bioterrorism, prompted Washington to see a safer, more effective vaccine against smallpox and monkeypox. It's not easy saying monkeypox about 6 times here, monkeypox. The federal government began to support the development of Bavarian Nordic's Genesis vaccine in 2017. The Trump administration awarded Bavarian a 10-year contract for freeze-dried vaccines, giving the U.S. rights to estimated 13 million doses. The Food and Drug Administration approved the vaccine in 2019, and the Trump administration in 2020 ordered 1.4 million doses in case of emergency. So when the first monkeypox cases popped up in mid-May, the U.S. had the benefit of scientific knowledge, experience, and ready-made vaccine. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention had reported 14,115 cases nationwide as of August the 18th, probably an underestimate since the virus can look similar to other diseases. No deaths have been reported to the U.S. But Biden officials' inept response has made the outbreak far worse than it might have been. On May the 22nd, 4 days after the first case was identified, Mr. Biden said monkeypox was something that everybody should be concerned about, although reports indicated that the virus was mainly spreading among gay men. Officials then rushed to tramp down a brewing panic. This is a virus we understand. White House COVID respond coordinator Ashish Jha. We have vaccines against it. We have tremendous treatments against it. It's not as contagious as COVID, and I am confident we're going to be able to keep our arms around it. At the time, the government had a mere 2,400 usable doses in the strategic national stockpile. Bavarian was stored under 372,000 doses in Denmark. The other doses the government had early were filed at Bavarian's new fill and finish factory in Denmark. To stretch the government's supply, the FDA this month approved a new method for injecting vaccines in the upper skin layer, which would allow each single dose vial to be split into 5 doses. Bavarian CEO warned officials in a letter that there was very limited safety data available to support this method, and local officials complained that healthcare workers weren't trained in it. Nevertheless, administration officials last week told states they would send them more doses only if they adopt this protocol. Making matters worse, doses were misdirected because the administration used antiquated computer systems to distribute them to states which could track the shipments. Our response is completely inefficient in breaking the back of state and local responders, Claire Hannon, executive director of the Association of Immunization Managers, told the New York Times. Meantime, some 1.7 million courses of the smallpox antiviral treatment, which could help patients, sit Washington's stockpile. European regulators have approved the drug to treat monkeypox, but the FDA hasn't, and the CDC is restricting access by requiring doctors to complete mounds of paperwork to prescribe it. The reason? Government officials explained in the New England Journal of Medicine last week that the National Institutes of Health wants to conduct a randomized controlled trial. Expanding access to the antiviral can make this harder to do, with risk getting a placebo when your physician can prescribe the real thing. But a trial could take years at the NIH's snail speed. The Trump administration was criticized for authorized convalescent plasma as a COVID treatment without evidence of randomized trials, but tens of thousands of patients probably benefited from access to it. The Biden administration's haphazard monkeypox response may cause hundreds of thousands of Americans to suffer needlessly. Why should we think Mr. Biden would have done any better with COVID? Thank you, Elisa Finley, for authoring this. Yes, it is good. I like it. Let's see. Joe Biden is still dragging his party down, writes Byron York. There has been a surge of optimism among Democrats lately when it comes to November's midterm elections. The short version of the thinking is maybe we're not going to get clobbered after all, but much of their hope is still likely in vain for one reason, President Joe Biden. It's true the so-called generic ballot polling has moved a few points in the Democrats' direction. The generic ballot question is, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Republicans or the Democratic candidates for your representative in Congress? In the Real Clear Politics average of polls, the Republican Party has led to the generic ballot question since late last year. At one point in February, the GOP was 4 points lead. For much of 2 points. But recently, Democrats have been catching up. At the moment, the two parties are essentially tied to the RCP average, with Republicans at 44.2 and Democrats at 44%. In the Senate, Democrats do have some reason for optimism about keeping their 50-50 tie, which would Democratic president gives them operational control. Former President Donald Trump has pushed weak candidates in few races, Georgia and Pennsylvania most foremost among them, who might end up costing Republicans their chance to win control of the Senate. There has been much discussion about Trump's clout in GOP primaries, but of course the final test is whether this candidates actually get elected. The problem is the House still looks bad for Democrats. And perhaps the biggest reason is this: a president's job approval rating is a critical indicator because the best single indicator of how well this party will do in midterm elections for the House. And Biden's job approval rating is still low and unlikely to rise out of the danger zone in the next 2.5 months. History is the defense evidence. There have been desert midterm elections since 1974. The president's party gained seats in just 2 of them. One was 2002, when the nation was more on footing under President George Bush. Bush's approval at the election time was 63%. The other examples were 1998. President Bill Clinton was being impeached by Republicans, a very unpopular move on the GOP's part. Clinton job approval rating soared to 66%, and Democrats picked up 5 seats. Republicans who thought they would gain a bunch of seats were stunned. Even a president with high approval ratings can lose seats. It happened in 1986 when Ronald Reagan job approval rating was 63%, really good, and the Republican Party still lost 5 seats. In 1990, George H.W. Bush's rating was 58%, and his party lost 8 seats. The bottom line is that the high job approval rating can protect a president against blowout midterm losses. On the other hand, when a president rating goes down, bad things happen for his party. Look at the few examples, all with numbers on the Gallup poll. 2010, Barack Obama's approval rating was 45%, and his party lost 63 seats in the House. I remember that. In 1994, Clinton's rating was 46%, and he lost 53 House seats. In 2018, Trump's rating was 51%, and his party lost 40 seats in the House. In 82, Reagan's rating was 42%, and his party lost 26 seats. Biden's job approval rating at the moment is 41.2%, the clear politics average of polls, where Biden's approval is 40.7. Biden's approval rating at day 581 of his presidency is lower than any other president since World War II, with the exception of Jimmy Carter and Harry Truman. Even Trump, whose ratings were low his entire presidency, had a higher approval at this point in his term than Biden does now. History says a president with a job approval rating of 1% will not see midterm gains. He just won't. But suppose Biden's approval rating goes up, what would that happen then? The answer is it's not going to happen. Note this from the election analysis, Nathan Gonzalez. Looking back more than 70 years, there's not been a single president who substantially improved his job approval rating from the late January, February of midterm election year. In the last 18 midterm elections, going back to Harry Truman, in 1950, the average president's job approval rating dropped 8 points this time of year and election day. In the rear politics average, Biden's job approval was 40% on February 1. It's 41% now. That's what Gonzalez was talking about. Biden is right about where he was at the beginning of February. That's not likely to substantially change by election day. Nonetheless, it's looking best for Republicans and not for the Democrats come for the middle election. Ladies and gentlemen, I have enjoyed blasting with the articles. Got one or two we missed on, and I'll include those next time around. I want to thank you, listeners, and my audience complete, to turn into searching for integrity. And like you, listeners, for tuning in, searching for integrity. So long and happy trails. Happy trails to all. John Smith, signing out.